We're recording. Welcome everybody to the Gateway API meeting for August 8th, 2022. I'm going to share my screen. Get started. Just a reminder to everybody that's here, and very welcome to anybody to put anything on the agenda for today. So if you need help getting access to this document, just ask in the chat. Somebody will send you a link, but you're welcome to put something on here for us to go over. Otherwise, let's get started with what we have on the agenda so far. So, Candida, guessing for the discussion on re-encrypt. Go ahead and talk about this, or was this over, or something?
Yeah. So I opened up a discussion on re-encrypt a few weeks back, and was going to work on a GEP for it. Was waiting for a few more people to provide some input on that. But Nick had commented that we may want to first make some progress on the GEP for backend properties, which was, they're kind of open and parallel. So I wanted to see if I should switch my efforts over to that, work on these in parallel, or I took a look at the Google Doc. That we started talking about last time we met. It's a beginning for the backend properties API. It's just the why, but not the how for that component. So Nick's not here today, so I can't really ask him directly if if that's the way that we should handle this, or does anybody have any advice on how I, as someone who wanted to work on a GEP, but it's sort of dependent on another GEP that's not done yet. Should I just back off, or switch over to working on the backend properties GEP?
I think in this case you might want to do that, just because they seem to be describing the same thing as far as I can tell. I don't know if what your proposal looks like.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the argument is that this re-encrypt stuff the configuration will belong in a resource or concept called backend properties, or that includes more than just, but it's basically a subset of the GEP that Nick referred to. Is that accurate?
I wasn't planning to separate. I mean, to me, it makes more sense for everything that has to do with TLS to be in the same place, and separating it as a backend property also has some, I don't know, it adds some complications, especially for people who might be used to looking in the TLS configuration in one place.
I see. This is an interesting thing. And we should definitely have a discussion about this, because it has happened many times before, is that is the termination of a client TLS property related to how the protocol you use to communicate with the backend post termination? And I think at least the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've had this discussion before, and it seemed like we've settled on the fact that they are somewhat decoupled from each other. For example, you can have one completely unique set of TLS properties for how you want clients to talk to you. And then you could, on the other end, not even be using TLS. You could, be using like plain text HTTP. You could send it over IRC protocol. I don't know, like it's like those two things are very, while they have the TLS in them usually, they actually are not necessarily completely tied to each other. And that was kind of where it, as from a sort of like API modeling perspective, we sort of gone down the line of thinking that you should describe them separately because they sort of move independently of each other versus being connected. And at least if you look at the implementation, a lot of the implementations, it's like you have one thing that's describing how you want to terminate clients and another thing entirely that's talking about how you want to communicate out from your proxy.
I think also I just throw in there that you may, because of match criteria, your route may, may send a back end that has to have certain connection requirements, whether those are TLS or protocol or something else, and under a different match condition, you'd send it to a different backend with different criteria. So I think you really do want to separate the minimum, the front versus the back side, but possibly even between the selected backend.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons for separating them. But could I back up to what Bowe was talking about? Are you saying that you think that we should not, you think that we should exclude backend TLS configuration from the listener?
Yeah, because at least, okay, this has come up before, so that's why I'm trying to give some context for the group. So as Jeff was saying, that imagine you have one listener that, let's say it comes in on HTTP for whatever reason, and then it splits traffic. One of them goes to like a set of backends that requires HTTPS to communicate with them. The rest of the paths are insecure, it's HTTP. Already you have a problem where if you set that at the listener, now you've basically, you can't describe this setup. And I don't think this setup is necessarily that unusual because, for example, you could be let's say you're terminating an entire website on the front end side. So you enforce some internet facing set of TLS settings, which may be, for example, if you support legacy clients, it may have some downgraded SSL. But on the back end, you might have different pools of applications that are being aggregated together. Some are in some transition where they support one set of TLS and then the other one supports another TLS. It's like that heterogeneity is, you can't capture that if you just put it at the listener level. And in fact, I think a lot of proxies, they don't have this like lockstep, like what comes in the front is actually what happens in the back.
So it seems that a lot of the feedback, even in the chat, is like the decoupled view, as Travis and Keith were adding on with in chat, is preferable to a lot of people. But how does that fit into your efforts and us keeping you unblocked or moving forward? Like, what do you need from us, Candace?
I guess I would need to switch over to working on the GEP for describing backend properties because there's no way I can make progress on the other one without that.
I think one of the things that Mike mentioned in chat earlier was that, we've been merging GEPs earlier in the process where, I guess similar to backend properties today, GEP has been, I don't know if we actually merged this yet, but the idea of merging something that is provisional and here is what we want to solve with this gap without actually having a solution quite yet. Maybe that's a starting place to continue moving this gap forward a little bit, but I think you're right. Eventually we'll run into needing to solve for backend properties before we go too much further down the re-encrypt gap, I think.
Also, that provisional gap has been sitting a little bit, not too long, but we probably should be trying to get that figured out fairly soon. Like if we can't get a provisional gap that has just a little bit of basic stuff merged within a couple of weeks, it's not necessarily great. And it certainly gets in people's way, as we're seeing. So I'll take on some effort after this meeting and this week to see if I can't push that thing along a little bit faster. But like Rob said, it may be just as good a time as any to at least start drafting up what you think might be a good follow-up to the otherwise just what and why gap with your version of the how. I would let Nick know that you're kind of thinking that, and even if you want to contribute, I think it's fair to ask and say, hey, I want to contribute. Put suggestions on the PR is probably the easiest way, but you can contribute to what's there too. It's not something that there's a PR up and you have to wait for it to be done. You can say, hey, this is my opinion on what we have so far. Here's my suggestions, and even ask to co-author it. I mean, that's all, fair game. So go ahead, Keith.
I think I was muted in my headset, but I'm interested in seeing how this process happens from an organizational process perspective, because it seems like with the provisional gap being a thing that we're starting to do, you've got the possibility of multiple different avenues of implementation in the how. And what does that process look like for coming to consensus on which how and merging that upstream into a gap? Those 4 different possible approaches separate gaps? Are they sub gaps? So I'm interested to see how this works, because we're probably doing something similar with Gamma, some of the gaps that I've started there.
Historically, with caps, it usually ends up being kind of the first one to get in there gets in there, and then the other ones can potentially displace it. And whichever one is not the one that we decide on end up in alternatives considered. So usually all of them end up on the gap, like every implementation suggested. It just comes down to something like a vote on which one actually is the one we end up implementing. So I don't foresee a huge problem with that. Like if we get a couple PRs with a couple different implementations, it will definitely take more time, but we'll end up documenting both and saying which one we ultimately decide on. And that's good. The posterity there is good. It keeps us clear on why we made the decisions that we made and so forth. Okay, so it seems like to move forward right now, Candace, I hope that you got some feedback that was at least helpful to kind of push you in the right direction a little bit that you want to go. But it does seem like a little bit of this still has to be taken care of, maybe async. Maybe this is something that we can, I would say, respond to Nick's comment in the discussion, and maybe that can be kind of the next step, with what you want to do, and we can talk about basically respond with well, my intention then is to do this, or maybe these 2 things, help you with this gap and review it, and maybe start on this, and we can just start going from there. Does that sound okay? To take some of this.
That sounds okay. There are a lot of other sort of alternative approaches that were discussed in the maybe 8 or 10 different times this has come up over the past couple of years. Another one was app protocol, which I get the sense has already been, I don't know. I don't really know what the status of app protocol is at this point.
Yeah. My understanding of the status of app protocol is it's kind of been said we needed something more, and it's kind of already been pushed to the side. That doesn't mean that you can't make a case or anything. It just, that's where it's been at so far conversationally. Was somebody trying to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things here. one, it sounds like, Candace, you already have a good understanding of all the previous conversations, and there have been many. So thank you for taking the time to look through our mess. But two, I think maybe that's a good place to move the get forward of maybe just put everything in alternatives considered. And to start out, like, there's a long history here, just getting them all in one place of, we consider these things, and maybe one of those will become solution proposed, but even just having them listed out in one central place of the things we considered, why we, hesitation we might have had with that approach. And also slightly unrelated, but I think Nick is out this entire week, so he may not be that responsive on GitHub. So yeah, so I think you're free to move ahead with anything. I know at least among maintainers, at least I believe Nick's approach is similar to Shane's and I, that we could use all the help we could possibly imagine, and very, very welcome to have co-authors, co-owners, or just someone take something over. So yeah, by all means.
Yeah, I think as long as your thing is not like completely does not work with what the philosophical statement that Nick put, I think you should just, just work out, like, hash out the concrete details. Because then it also helps, like, let's say we get all that stuff in, it's like immediately everything's already ready for the next discussion. And it could also point to, like, okay, what if we wanted to get that in earlier? What is a smaller piece that could go in beforehand? Like, just, it helps prioritize.
So are you guys saying that I should, in the alternatives considered for my gap or for Nick's gap, list out all of the things that we have considered over the last couple of years for solving this problem?
I think there's actually enough discussion of both of these topics. And I'm very helpful. If you want to reach out on Slack or somewhere, I have some context as well. I think whichever seems most helpful to you. I know there's plenty of historical context that could be built and described in one place for both of these ideas. So, for the backend properties idea, we once had a backend policy that got removed. But that deserves some discussion of why it existed, why we removed it. And there's also been some discussion about re-encrypt, though I don't think anything has made it into the API and been pulled out yet, but still plenty of discussion, like you said.
Yeah, I think app protocol was there at one point and had been pulled out, or at least some documentation on it.
You're right. I think we did. Thank you. Yeah, I think we suggested using app protocol and then weren't sure about how that would work. And yeah, good call. So yes, having central list of all these things that are related that we've done in the past and regretted or pulled out or not implemented yet would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that sounds very wise, and appreciate the willingness to contribute to that. I mean, it sounded like you were willing to contribute to that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Candace, but that would probably be a great place to start, because otherwise we keep trying to figure out what we were trying to do before, and it's all sprawled everywhere. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, back to the list here. Rob, delegation.
Yeah, so there's a couple things in here. Jeff, I saw that Jeff updated the main PR, and so I just wanted to highlight that quickly. And apparently I didn't link to the right thing. Sorry. But there's not that many PRs in there. It's yeah, that's funny. It's,
if you just just list the PRs, it's actually near the top of the list, I think.
Yeah.
1058.
Yeah. And so this is I don't know. I just raised this again because I know you've made updates, but if there's not much to discuss, we can move on to the other thing I had related to this.
No, this is Toby went ahead and made a lot of the cleanup of the little formatting and grammar and things like that. And he submitted PR to my fork, and so I've just merged that in and brought that in forward. So that takes care of all that stuff. So the noise, if you will. So,
Great.
This
Perfect.
PR is a monster.
It is. Yeah.
So what,
Yeah,
I
what
made,
145 comments right now.
this is a
Yeah.
monster.
uh,
So you want to talk
this-
about your PR to the
Sure. Maybe open it up in deploy preview mode. I added a link at the bottom. Maybe because it's a markdown table, it's near impossible to read any other way. Yeah, so this is something that I took some time, I described last week of we really need a list of capabilities in HP route and how they could interact with delegation. And this is my attempt at doing that. It is very much what I would label work in progress. Many of these labels are rather arbitrary in terms of what I derive as importance or complexity, but it is a starting point and very welcome to comment on these. So yeah, it's just a draft PR. I'm not exactly sure how this would work. I'm assuming we would incorporate it into Jeff's PR, or we would merge this after Jeff's PR merges. I'm not sure on the specifics of how we do this. But this is really just what I think would be an appendix in the gap of here are all the different possible capabilities and how they could work.
So I just had one thought in terms of sort of, it feels like, Jeff, that, and I'm looking at the group, that we are all directionally thinking that some form of delegation should get in. And is it the case that there's a lot of like specific discussion? Should it be a separate resource? Should it be the same resource? What specific fields are the behavior of delegation or not? Like, does it help to basically put that out there in the proposal itself? Just say explicitly like, hey, many of these things are still yet to be discussed. And what is here is sort of like a concrete sketch that people can anchor their discussion on, but not necessarily the final form. And that helped sort of make people comfortable to move this forward. Sorry for butting in, Rob, but
or Jeff, I think you're about to respond. I think you're muted, sorry.
I didn't quite catch the end of what Shane was saying. Or Shane or Boy, I'm not sure who that was. My internet connection's a little touchy right now, so.
apparently we sound a lot alike, Bowie. I didn't realize it.
oh, that's awesome. I can impersonate you.
We'll trick everybody. We'll just keep changing things.
So my general thing is like, I think as a group, we want something related to delegation in, like some mechanism. And what will be hard if we is like people are just talking about like, should we have two resources, one resource, like what are the different trade-offs? I think that one is going to be hard to resolve and get just the general directional proposal in. So what I thought was it might be good is to basically say explicitly in the proposal that we are still looking at like some aspects of this, but the general requirements, if we could like highlight them, like it has to be statically computable, you know, like those we've agreed upon, and then we can get it in. The proposal itself is like has a lot of detail that's great that we should get documented, but we sort of still have this like, these are the things that we still need to discuss to kind of finalize the form.
I've done this. So actually, in the job I'm currently in and the last job, we actually used caps locally, and we've done this exact thing just by saying, okay, we're going to merge it, but provisional with a to-do list. The to-do list is required before it can move out of provisional. And as long as everybody kind of agrees on the to-do list, That's worked out a few times.
Yeah, I think that seems very appropriate for this. This is a massive gap, and I think there's a lot of very good content in it. It seems like there's broad directional agreement and a lot of questions about the specific details. Yeah, I like the idea of getting a subset of this in soon, with the idea of these are the things that are still unanswered. These are the things that we need to solve before we get to implementable. And then we can just kind of work away at those.
So what I would have suggested and what I've done in the past is actually you take the open comments that are having trouble closing, turn those specifically into the to-do items, and then put the names of the stakeholders on them and say, this person has to be involved in like this moving forward. But there's a lot of effing comments that are unresolved. So I don't know if that's actually the best way to go about it.
I think maybe maybe what I'll do the next couple days here is I'll go through all the comments and try to bucketize them, if you will. You know, from that point, we can say, okay, you know, do we need to deal with this bucket as a whole? You know, is it just a top line single issue, or is it really a collection of smaller issues that individually need to be addressed? And then we can say, you know, okay, this bucket that's a major thing, like, do we use allowed routes or do we use some other type of object? You know, that's a to be resolved, or we resolve that before we move it to provisional. And then the buckets of lots of little things, maybe those are the to-do list, something like that. But at least get them into a few buckets. Rob had already taken an initial shot at this. Now that this is cleaned up, I can go through and be more specific about, you know, which comments are in which bucket, so to speak.
Yeah, sounds good. So like basically next step, call it provisional. Right here, just put a to-do section, point out in clear English, this to-do section needs to be resolved before we can move out of provisional, and see if you can distill it into as few items as possible. Put that up in the PR, and then unless somebody has like an egregious stop the world, don't push this provisional cap blocker, we merge it, and then we start working forward on the to-do list, maybe with one issue at a time, like until we get it done. Sound about right?
Yep. Yeah, sounds great.
All right.
Actually, if you can go back to my PR, yeah, that one. I think there's a little bit worth discussing in here. I think a lot of my takeaway from this is that the specific things are not, many of them are less complicated than I thought they would be. I went into it thinking that, and maybe I've missed very important details. I think by and large, regex anything is going to be awful. But and then a broader theme of there are a couple things that really only make sense in one or the other, like a child or a parent, but never both at the same time. And trying to communicate that or validate that is going to be tricky. Though those are the high level concerns. I also wrote this out because it was a concern I'd had and hadn't really realized yet, is that we support multiple matches in HTTP route and they're ORed together. So a request could match get/foo or post/bar, and trying to think about how that interacts with delegation. I think it technically works, but it could result in resource explosion if you have ORs on top of each other. So you have, like, let's say 16 OR rules in a match, like, and then each child route has a bunch of ORs too. Then you, like, the exponential explosion that we're talking about in terms of configuration would be pretty wild if you took that at face value. The other, you know, so a simple example here, you have two matches, one is on the get, one is on the post, and then your child route only matches get. So I guess you interpret that as only matches get / foo baz and not / bar baz, because, you know, like you can see how that could translate, but it's just something like that I hadn't really thought of. I just added this to the open question section below. Anyway, I open to ideas and feedback here. I think there's some interesting things this opens up. Overall, I think this is still doable, but there are some corner cases that this highlights. Yeah.
You weren't supposed to
Feedback.
discover those corner cases until after we approved it all.
So sad.
Sounds like good
Cool.
items for the to-do list and some
Yeah.
things we have to recall before we mark this as implementable.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
All right. Rob.
Cool. Okay.
Rob,
Yeah,
you're
I guess
dominating. What are you doing?
Whoops.
Let's talk conformance.
All right, so conformance one, as I had mentioned in a recent meeting, I wanted to actually make an effort to document our conformance approach. I have a PR that does that. It's kind of we had some basic docs about conformance in our implementation guidelines docs, which felt somewhat out of place and hidden. And if you've looked at our implementation guidelines doc recently, it's massive. So I pulled this out and made a conformance specific page that covers our support levels, our release channels, and our conformance tests. I'm not sure that release channel, whatever, we don't need to go into the details of this specific PR now, but I just wanted to highlight this is a thing that could use some review, really just trying to have some kind of central place for conformance. And I think that's indicative of a larger term effort. I think V0.6.0, one of our big themes has to be an improved focus on conformance. We have a fairly, I don't want to say stable, but a well thought out core API now. And I think a lot of our investment over the past couple months has been in conformance. And this leads into the next thing that I had to say about conformance is I really would love to have a stretch goal of V0.6.0 actually including a concept of a conformance report that when you run conformance tests, there's some kind of deliverable that says this is the result of my conformance test with these parameters and these results. And maybe some kind of opt-in dashboard or something that shows conformant implementations with links to those reports. These are things that we've discussed before, but I think I just want to make sure we get to that point. I reached out to a couple of the people from the CNCF conformance side that have helped in SIG conformance, I think. Hopefully I'm getting those terms right. But if anyone is interested in helping discuss conformance, I'm going to meet with them sometime next week. Have not set up a time yet. So if you want to be involved in this discussion and how they can help, I really do want to make our conformance more visible and more approachable. And yeah, that's kind of one of my goals for V0.6.0 and would love any help. So if anyone's interested, just yeah, let me know.
I'll be interested in helping out with that. I did the original implementation of conformance for one of our implementations of Gateway way back, like in the earlier days of conformance, but one of the other engineers on my team right now is finishing up getting V0.5.0 conformance done. So I might try to pull him into, and if he's interested, and see if we can work on kind of just dialing it up a bit is what it sounds like, but also, getting cool things like little buttons, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I'm interested in that as well, Rob.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. I'll
Yes.
follow up after.
As we continue implementing parts of the spec, we'll continue to contribute conformance tests in those areas that they don't exist.
Great. Yeah, I have loved to see just the huge contributions from so many on conformance front. I think we have a really good set of tests already, and I know they just continue to expand. So thank you to everyone who's been contributing them.
I'll add in, so this is some of my experience from the SMI world, but Lee Calcote from the from CNCF tag network has done some really cool work around SMI conformance tests and automated reporting of said conformance tests. He might be a good resource to reach out to see what learnings might be found there. So I put a link in the chat to how Tag Network CNC like Meshery does their conformance tests and what there's a UI and everything. So that might be worth exploring for those folks who are interested in doing conformance stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I was talking with John sometime last week about how conformance plus gamma and mesh implementations is going to add a whole different perspective on conformance here whenever we get to it. So yeah, that I mean, this is broadly applicable, but especially when we start getting to mesh, it's going to be very, very applicable. So yeah, I'll follow up with that too. Thanks.
All right, Rob. Talk about KubeCon.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to add this last thing. I congrats to everyone who made it in. I think we have 6 different presentations that are going to be related to Gateway API at KubeCon. It's great. Excited to meet some of you for the first time in person there. I just want to say on KubeCon front, I'm looking into organizing some kind of community event. It sounds like the best day for that is Tuesday, but to be determined. But if anyone wants to be involved with that or has ideas for that, I would just love to have an excuse to meet different Gateway API maintainers and anyone who's been involved in this project. So just think about that. And again, anyone who has ideas or wants to be involved or will be there, just reach out. And if you're only coming in on, say, Wednesday, or you're leaving early, or who knows what, also let us know. I think we might actually be done a meeting early.
Yeah, we might, unless somebody has something to add. No, I'll be at KubeCon. It's in my backyard. I'll be driving to KubeCon. So I would very much like to try to get together and do something, like as a group. So I basically live here, but I can't think of anything. Like, we could do something that was a little bit less sitting down and talking about Gateway API if we wanted to just do something fun. We'd probably come up with something like that too, like maybe talk about it or go do something fun and then sit around and talk about Gateway API. It depends on if everybody's going to be, when everybody's going to be there. Because like, were you thinking like more like on the weekend, like as people are coming in? What were you thinking?
So I'm really biased in that the way KubeCon usually works for me is Tuesdays are an empty day. Because I go to Contrib Summit on Monday and the main conference doesn't start till Wednesday. But I know a chunk of Gateway people will be going to co-located events, which would be on Tuesday. So I know that doesn't work for everyone. So it'll be hard to find a time that works perfectly. But I know lots of people are coming in kind of Monday morning and leaving Friday night kind of thing. So there's not a lot of extra time outside of those days.
Roger that. Well, I'm open to trying to fit something in on Tuesday. I didn't do any of the extracurriculars this year.
Cool.
We'll keep following up that. That's going to be a thread. We're going to keep following up on that in the coming weeks, I imagine. All right. So
Shane, if I was going to say, one of the things we talked about is having Gamma periodically kind of report status in this meeting. I didn't know if those who've been participating in that, if there's a point in the next few weeks where it would be good to provide an update.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I appreciate you bringing that back up. I think we've had 2 meetings. Yes, I was at a conference last week, so my time is still not completely back, but I think we've had 2 meetings total. With the 3rd slated for before tomorrow. I think the 22nd would be a pretty good kind of status check. So that gives both meetings 2 occurrences, and that'd be a good chance for us to kind of give what we're working on. There's pretty good work going on. We've had some really good discussions for the last couple of meetings. So I would love to update the greater Gateway API community with where we are.
Great. Thanks, Keith.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else that wants to add something last minute to the agenda, has anything that they want to discuss? We have 15 minutes. If there's anybody here that has never come before and just wants to introduce themselves and chat, go for it. Otherwise, all right. Have a good one. Enjoy the 15 minutes back, everybody. Cheers.
See ya.
Thanks.